The sound of a shattering plate is often the loudest thing you'll ever hear in a marriage. For Ginaa, it wasn't just a broken dish. It was the sound of her husband, Grady, breaking the last shred of her patience. Grady Thorne thought he was the king of his world, a high-powered architect who believed his wife was nothing more than a simple charity case he'd picked up from a diner. He screamed at her, called her worthless, and mocked her nobody family. But Grady made a fatal calculation. He didn't know that the woman sweeping up the glass wasn't just a housewife. She was the only daughter of the most feared federal judge in the state. And court was about to be in session. The morning sun over Seattle usually brought a sense of promise, but inside the penthouse apartment on 4th Avenue, it only illuminated the dust motes dancing in the tension. Grady Thorne stood by the kitchen island, his knuckles white as he gripped the marble countertop. He was a handsome man, sharply dressed in a bespoke navy suit that cost more than most people's cars, but his face was twisted into a sneer that ruined the aesthetic. "I asked for the gray folder, Ginaa, the gray one. Is it truly that difficult?" Grady's voice wasn't loud yet, but it had that terrifying, low vibration that usually preceded an explosion. Ginaa, standing near the sink, didn't flinch. She was used to this. She was 28, with soft features and eyes that held a depth Grady had never bothered to look into. She wore a simple, oversized sweater and leggings, her hair tied back in a messy bun. To Grady, she was the beautiful waitress he had rescued from a diner 3 years ago. To him, she was a trophy that was starting to collect dust. "It's on the entry table, Grady," she said, her voice steady. "Where you left it last night after your 3rd scotch." Grady spun around, his eyes narrowing. He hated when she was right. He hated that she was calm. He marched to the entry table, snatched the gray folder, and then stormed back into the kitchen, slamming it down onto the island. The noise echoed off the high ceilings. "Don't get smart with me," he spat. "You think because you sit around this apartment all day spending my money, you have the right to give me attitude? I have the biggest zoning hearing of my career today. The Kensington project. If I don't get the variances approved, the firm loses millions. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? You've never managed anything more complex than a shift schedule." Ginaa turned off the faucet and dried her hands. "I understand stress, Grady, but you don't need to take it out on me." "Stress?" Grady laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "You don't know what stress is. You know what stress is? It's having to clean up the mess incompetent people make. It's dealing with the sharks at the city council. You're just there. You're decorative. And barely that lately." He looked her up and down with disdain. "Look at you. No ambition. No drive. Just happy to leech off a successful man. I suppose that's just genetics. Your parents were probably nobodies who settled for mediocrity, so you do too." Ginaa's spine stiffened. This was a recurring theme. Grady knew nothing about her family. When they met, she had been using her mother's maiden name Moore and working at a diner to research a thesis for her PhD in sociology, a degree she had never told him she finished because he never asked. He assumed she was poor, he assumed she had no one, and she had let him believe it, wanting to be loved for herself, not for the heavy gavel that ruled her family tree. "Leave my parents out of this," Ginaa warned quietly. "Or what?" Grady took a step closer, towering over her. "You'll go back to them? Oh, wait, you can't. You said they were distant, probably because they're embarrassed of you. Or maybe they're just trailer trash like I suspect. Face it, Ginaa, without me, you're on the street." He checked his Rolex, a gift she had bought him with her trust fund money, though he thought she had saved up her allowance for 2 years to buy it. "I have to go. I'm meeting with the legal team." Apparently, the opposition has brought in a heavy hitter for the hearing next week. "I need my head in the game, not dealing with an incompetent wife." He grabbed his briefcase. As he walked to the door, he stopped and looked back. "Have dinner ready at 6. And try to look presentable. I might bring a partner home. Don't embarrass me." The door slammed shut, the heavy thud vibrating through the floorboards. Ginaa stood in the silence of the luxury prison. She walked over to the window, watching Grady get into his Porsche down on the street. She picked up her phone. She scrolled past the contacts of plumber and hairstylist until she reached a contact simply labeled Dad. She hesitated. She had promised herself she would make this marriage work on her own terms. She wanted to prove she didn't need her father's protection. But Grady's words about her family, about them being nobodies, stung differently today. She didn't press call. Not yet. Instead, she dialed another number. Law offices of Arthur Vance. How may I direct your call? A crisp, professional voice answered. Hi, Sarah, Ginaa said, her voice changing from the submissive wife to a tone of authority. It's Ginaa. Is the docket for the Kensington zoning hearing public yet? Ginaa! Oh, the judge has been asking about you. Yes, the docket was just updated this morning. It's been assigned to courtroom 4B. Why do you ask? Who is the presiding judge? Well, Sarah chuckled. It was supposed to be Judge Henderson, but he had a medical emergency this morning. The Chief Justice reassigned it to your father. He's taking the bench on Monday. Ginaa felt a cold, sharp smile touch her lips. Grady was worried about the opposition. He had no idea the real danger was going to be sitting behind the bench. Thanks, Sarah. Don't tell him I called. Of course, dear. Ginaa hung up. Grady wanted her to be useful. He wanted her to understand his world. She walked to the bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the top shelf. She wasn't leaving. Not yet. She had a front-row seat to the show, and she wouldn't miss it for the world. 3 days passed. The atmosphere in the penthouse had shifted from hostile to toxic. Grady was barely sleeping. The Kensington project was hitting roadblocks. Apparently, the environmental impact report was flawed, and a local community group was suing to stop the construction of the high-rise. Grady was drinking more. The scotch bottle was his primary companion in the evenings. On Thursday night, Grady came home in a rage. He threw his jacket onto the couch and loosened his tie violently. Unbelievable! He shouted to the empty room. Absolute incompetence! Ginaa walked in from the patio, holding a book. What happened? The city council rejected the preliminary motion. Grady paced the room, his face flushed. They're scared. They're scared of this new judge. Apparently, the case got moved to Judge Vance. They call him the Hammer in the circuit. He's an old-school hardliner. Doesn't take bribes, doesn't take bullshit, and hates corporate overreach. Ginaa sat down on the armchair, crossing her legs. Judge Vance, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. He sounds principled. Grady stopped pacing and looked at her with incredulous eyes. Principled? He's a nightmare, Ginaa. He's a dinosaur. He's going to comb through every single permit application. If he finds one clerical error, one missed signature, he'll tank a $200 million project. My project. He poured himself a drink, his hand shaking slightly. I need this. If I land Kensington, I make partner. If I lose it, the firm might cut me loose. He turned his fear into anger, directing it at the easiest target in the room. But why am I telling you this? You're probably thinking about what nail polish color to buy tomorrow. Actually, Ginaa said, closing her book. I was thinking about the environmental impact report. Did you check the water table surveys from 2021? I read an article that said that area of the city has unstable soil composition. Grady froze. He stared at her for a second, then burst out laughing. It was a condescending, ugly sound. You read an article? He shook his head. Stick to Vogue, honey. Leave the engineering and law to the men who actually went to college. The soil is fine. We paid the surveyor to say it's fine. Ginaa's eyes went cold. You paid the surveyor? Grady waved his hand dismissively. It's how business is done, Ginaa. Not that you'd know. It's called greasing the wheels. Everybody does it. We just need Judge Vance to look the other way, or be too busy to notice. And if he isn't? Then I'm screwed, Grady muttered. Then he glared at her. And if I'm screwed, you're screwed. No more trips, no more jewelry, no more penthouse. You'll be back, slinging hash at the diner. The doorbell rang. Grady frowned. Who the hell is that at 9 p.m.? He walked to the door and yanked it open. A process server stood there, a short, stout man with a clipboard. Grady Thorne? Yes. What is this? You've been served, sir. Subpoena strictly for the hearing on Monday, regarding the Kensington fraud allegations. You're being called as a primary witness regarding the survey documents. Grady snatched the papers. Fraud? It's a zoning hearing. Not anymore, sir. The opposing counsel amended the complaint. Have a good evening. The man walked away. Grady stood in the doorway, the color draining from his face. He slammed the door and looked at the papers. His hands were trembling violently now. They're coming after me personally, he whispered. They think I authorized the altered surveys. Did you? Ginaa asked. She hadn't moved from the chair. Grady turned on her, his eyes wild. I did what I was told to do by the senior partners, but they're going to hang me out to dry. I need a character witness. I need to look like a family man. A man of integrity. He pointed a finger at her. You're coming on Monday. I thought I was an embarrassment, Ginaa said calmly. You are, Grady snapped, but you're a pretty embarrassment. You're going to sit in that front row, you're going to wear a modest dress, and you're going to look at me with adoration. You're going to play the role of the supportive, loving wife so Judge Vance sees a man with a stable home life, not a corporate shark. Ginaa stood up slowly. You want me to lie for you? To a federal judge? I want you to do your job, Grady screamed, stepping into her personal space. I pay for the food you eat. I pay for the clothes on your back. For one day, you will shut up and do exactly what I tell you. If this goes south, I am not going down alone. I'll make your life a living hell. Ginaa looked at him. She saw the fear behind his eyes, but she also saw the rot in his soul. The man she thought she had married, the ambitious, charming architect, was gone. Or maybe he never existed. Okay, Grady, she said softly. I'll be there. I'll be right in the front row. Good, he huffed, loosening his tie further. Wear the blue dress, the high-neck one. Look respectable. Try to look like you come from a good family, for once. He stormed off toward the bedroom. Ginaa waited until the door clicked shut. She walked over to the kitchen island where Grady had left his phone. He had changed the passcode, but he was predictable. It was his birthday. She unlocked it and navigated to his emails. She didn't need to look for long. There was an email chain with the surveyor explicitly discussing the bribe. Grady had replied, "Just get it done. I don't care about the soil stability. I care about the permit." She forwarded the email to a private, encrypted account. Then she deleted the sent log. She put the phone down and walked to the balcony, looking out at the city lights. Grady wanted her to look like she came from a good family. He wanted her to face Judge Vance. He was going to get exactly what he wished for. She pulled out her phone and dialed her father. "Hello?" A deep, gravelly voice answered on the second ring. It was a voice that had sentenced cartel leaders and corrupt senators. "Daddy?" Ginaa said, her voice breaking slightly before strengthening. "Ellie?" The voice instantly softened. "Is everything all right? I haven't heard from you in weeks. How is that husband of yours?" He's in trouble, Dad. He has a hearing on Monday, in your courtroom." There was a pause on the line, a heavy judicial silence. "The Kensington case?" Judge Vance asked, his tone sharpening. "He's the architect on record?" "Yes." "Ellie, you know I can't discuss active cases." "If he is your husband, I might have to recuse myself. Conflict of interest." "No," Ginaa said quickly. "You don't have to recuse yourself. Because by Monday morning, I'm filing for divorce." "Is he hurting you?" The voice was no longer a judge's. It was a father's, dangerous and protective. "He's trying to," Ginaa said. "He thinks I'm worthless, Dad. He thinks I'm a nobody. He's subpoenaed me to sit in the front row to play the doting wife, to fool you." "Fool me?" Vance let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "I want you to hear the case, Dad. I want you to see him. I want you to see exactly who he is. Just promise me one thing." "Anything, sweetie." Don't tell him who I am. Not until the very end. Monday morning, Ellie, Judge Vance said. Wear the blue dress. I always liked that one. Ginaa hung up. She looked at her reflection in the glass door. The timid wife was gone. The judge's daughter was ready for court. The weekend in the Thorne penthouse passed with the agonizing slowness of a held breath. Grady was a man possessed, vibrating with a manic energy that swung violently between crippling anxiety and unearned arrogance. He spent hours on the phone with his legal team, pacing the hardwood floors, his voice booming through the open-plan living area. Ginaa became a ghost in her own home. She moved silently from room to room, performing the domestic duties Grady expected of her, but with a detachment that unnerved him, though he was too self-absorbed to pinpoint why. On Sunday evening, the atmosphere was suffocating. Outside, the Seattle rain battered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the city lights into smeared streaks of neon. Inside, Grady had set up a mock courtroom in the dining room. He had arranged chairs to represent the prosecution, the defense, and the judge's bench. "Sit down," Grady commanded, pointing to a chair he had designated as the witness gallery. Ginaa sat, folding her hands in her lap. She was wearing the blue dress he had demanded, a high-necked, modest piece that made her look younger, softer, and infinitely more vulnerable. It was exactly the image Grady wanted to project, the protector of a delicate flower. Now, Grady paced in front of her, holding a tumbler of scotch. "Let's go over the talking points again. If anyone approaches you, a reporter, a clerk, anyone, what do you say?" "I say nothing," Ginaa recited, her voice flat. "I smile, I hold your hand, and I look at you with admiration." "Good. And if the judge addresses you?" "It's unlikely. Vance is a stickler for procedure and rarely talks to the gallery. But if he does?" "I answer politely. I say that you are a dedicated husband who works tirelessly for the city." "Dedicated," Grady repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, dedicated. Not obsessed. Not stressed. Dedicated." He stopped and leaned down, his face inches from hers. The smell of expensive alcohol and stale coffee clung to him. "You know, Ginaa, you should be thanking me." Ginaa looked up, her expression unreadable. "Thanking you, Grady?" "Yes. Look at this." He gestured around the opulent apartment. "You think you'd have this with some mechanic or teacher? You have a life of leisure because I take the risks. I'm the one in the arena. Tomorrow, I'm going to war for us. For my reputation, which puts food in your mouth." He straightened his tie in the reflection of the window. "Vance is just a man. A bitter, old man who probably hates successful people because he's on a government salary. I'll charm him, or my lawyers will bury him in paperwork. Either way, we win. We always win." Ginaa stood up. "I'm going to bed, Grady. We have to be up early. Don't you walk away when I'm talking to you," Grady snapped, slamming his hand on the table. Ginaa stopped. She didn't flinch this time. She turned, slowly. "I'm not walking away, Grady. I'm preparing. You want me to look fresh and beautiful for your big day, don't you? Bags under my eyes won't sell the happy trophy wife narrative." Grady blinked, taken aback by her logic. He scoffed. "Fine. Go. Take a sleeping pill if you have to. I don't want you twitching." Ginaa went into the bedroom. She didn't take a sleeping pill. Instead, she reached under the bed and pulled out a small, pre-packed duffel bag. It contained her passport, her birth certificate, a few changes of clothes, and a file folder containing the printed screenshots of Grady's emails. She hid the bag in the back of her closet, behind the long winter coats Grady never looked at. She lay in bed, listening to Grady muttering to himself in the other room, rehearsing his lies. "The soil samples were inconclusive. The safety of the community is my top priority." He was a good liar. He had lied to her for 3 years, telling her he loved her when he only loved possessing her. But tomorrow, he was going to try to lie to Arthur Vance. Ginaa closed her eyes and smiled in the dark. Her father had a nickname in the circuit, one Grady had mentioned with fear, the Hammer. But Ginaa knew another name for him. To her, he was the man who had taught her how to play chess. He had taught her that you never sacrifice your queen until the trap is already sprung. "Checkmate, Grady?" she whispered into the pillow. Monday morning dawned gray and severe. The William Kenzo Nakamura United States Courthouse stood like a fortress of stone and glass against the gloomy sky. It was a place designed to make individuals feel small, to remind them that the law was a monolith that could crush or protect with equal indifference. Grady's Porsche screeched into the parking garage. He was tense, his movements jerky. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror 3 times before getting out. "Come on," he hissed at Ginaa, who was struggling to get out of the low sports car in her dress. "Don't drag your feet. We're meeting lead counsel in 5 minutes." He didn't offer her a hand. He marched toward the elevator, checking his watch. Ginaa followed a few paces behind, her heels clicking rhythmically on the concrete. She felt a strange sense of calm settling over her, a steeliness that replaced her usual anxiety. They took the elevator up to the 6th floor. The hallway was bustling with lawyers, clerks, and nervous defendants. The air smelled of floor wax and fear. Standing near the double doors of courtroom 4B was Grady's lead attorney, Gregory Sterling. Sterling was a man who looked like he was made of oil and expensive cologne. He wore a suit that shimmered slightly under the fluorescent lights and a smile that didn't reach his shark-like eyes. "Grady," Sterling boomed, extending a hand. "You look ready." "Sharp." "Sterling." Grady nodded, gripping the hand. "Is everything set? Did you file the motion to suppress the email evidence?" "We filed it," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But Vance denied it immediately this morning. He's not playing ball. He wants everything on the record." Grady's face paled. "He denied it. On what grounds?" "Relevance. He said if there's nothing to hide, the emails shouldn't be a problem." Sterling shrugged, though a bead of sweat tricked down his temple. "Look, don't worry. It's circumstantial. We stick to the narrative. You relied on the subcontractors. You were the architect, not the geologist. You trusted the experts. Plausible deniability." Sterling's eyes shifted to Ginaa. He looked her up and down with a greasy appreciation. "And this must be the better half. Mrs. Thorne, is it?" "Ginaa," she said quietly. "Charmed." Sterling smirked. "Grady, she's perfect." "The jury?" "Well, there is no jury. It's a bench trial. But the judge will see a wholesome, supportive woman. It softens your edges. Good strategy." "That's why she's here," Grady said dismissively. "Ginaa, go sit inside. Front row, directly behind the defense table. Don't slouch." Ginaa nodded and pushed past the 2 men. She approached the heavy wooden doors of courtroom 4B. Beside the door was a brass plaque. "Honorable Arthur J. Vance, presiding judge." She reached out and barely grazed the letters of her father's name with her fingertips. A passing bailiff, a burly man named Officer Miller who had known Ginaa since she was 12, looked up. His eyes widened in recognition. He opened his mouth to say, "Ellie?" But Ginaa brought a finger to her lips, shaking her head slightly. Miller paused, looked at the arrogant man barking orders behind her, and then understood. A small, grim smile touched his lips. He nodded and held the door open for her. "Court is open, ma'am," Miller said formally. "Thank you, officer," Ginaa replied, stepping into the arena. The courtroom was imposing. Dark wood paneling, high ceilings, and the Great Seal of the United States hanging behind the elevated bench. It smelled of old paper and justice. Ginaa took her seat in the front row. Minutes later, Grady and Sterling entered. They sat at the defense table. The plaintiffs, a group of community organizers, and their ragged-looking public interest lawyer, sat at the other table. They looked outmatched. Sterling had a team of 3 paralegals. The opposition had a stack of disorganized folders. Grady turned around and winked at Ginaa. It was a gesture meant to be reassuring, but it felt like a threat. "Stick to the script," his eyes said. A side door opened, and a clerk stood up. "All rise!" The room shuffled to its feet. The silence was absolute. "The United States District Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Arthur Vance presiding." Judge Vance walked in. He was a mountain of a man, even in his late 60s. He wore the black robe not as a garment, but as armor. His hair was steel gray, his face lined with decades of hard decisions. But it was his eyes that were terrifying, piercing blue eyes that seemed to X-ray the soul. He moved to the bench with a heavy, purposeful gait. He didn't look at the lawyers. He didn't look at the gallery. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and opened the file in front of him. "Be seated." His voice rumbled, filling the room without the need for a microphone. Grady sat down, smoothing his suit jacket. He leaned over to Sterling. "He looks old," he whispered loud enough for Ginaa to hear. "We can handle him." Judge Vance looked up slowly. His gaze landed directly on Grady. "Mr. Thorne," Vance said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "If you have something to say, I suggest you say it to the court record. Otherwise, I expect silence while I review the docket." Grady froze. He cleared his throat. "Apologies, Your Honor. The case is City of Seattle versus Thorne Architecture and Development," Vance read. "Allegations of zoning fraud, bribery, and gross negligence regarding the Kensington project. We are here to determine if the injunction to stop construction stands and if criminal referrals are necessary." Vance took off his glasses and looked at the defense table. "Mr. Sterling, I see you filed 4 motions to dismiss over the weekend. They are all denied. This court is interested in the truth, not procedural gymnastics." Sterling stood up, his slick demeanor faltering. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the allegations are baseless." "Then you should have no trouble disproving them." Vance cut him off. "Sit down. Call your first witness." The morning session was a bloodbath, but a slow one. The plaintiff's attorney, a woman named Ms. Holloway, was sharper than she looked. She walked the court through the timeline of the Kensington project, showing how safety checks were skipped and how the soil reports were mysteriously delayed. Grady watched with growing agitation. He kept turning to look at Ginaa, checking to make sure she was still playing her part. She offered him a small, encouraging nod each time, which seemed to stabilize him. Just wait, she thought. Just wait. At 11 a.m., Miss Holloway looked at the defense table. "Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Grady Thorne to the stand." Grady stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the witness box with a practiced stride, projecting confidence. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. "Mr. Thorne," Miss Holloway began, "you are the lead architect on the Kensington project, correct?" "I am." "And you are responsible for approving all subcontractor reports?" "I oversee them, yes," Grady said smoothly. "But I rely on the expertise of the specialists. I am an architect, not a soil engineer." "So, if a soil engineer told you the ground was unstable, you would halt the project?" "Absolutely," Grady lied. "Safety is our #1 priority at Thorne Architecture." Ginaa watched him. He didn't even blink. "Then how do you explain Exhibit C?" Ms. Holloway held up a document. "This is a preliminary report from Geotech Inc. dated 6 months ago. It states clearly, ground composition is 40% unstable silt. Liquefaction risk during an earthquake is high. Did you see this report?" Grady smiled condescendingly. "I receive hundreds of reports, Miss Holloway. That was a draft. The final report cleared the site." "The final report," Holloway said, "was issued by a different company 2 weeks later. A company owned by your college roommate's brother. Did you order a new survey because you didn't like the first one?" "Objection!" Sterling shouted. "Speculation!" "Sustained," Judge Vance said, though his eyes remained fixed on Grady. "Rephrase, counselor." Ms. Holloway grilled him for an hour. Grady parried every question. He was slippery, blaming subordinates, blaming the city council, blaming the weather. He was winning. He was making the prosecution look desperate. By noon, Grady was relaxing. He leaned back in the witness chair, crossing his legs. He even shot a smirk at the judge. "Mr. Thorne." Judge Vance spoke up. The room went silent. The judge hadn't asked a question all morning. "Yes, Your Honor?" Grady said, his tone bordering on insolent. You stated that you live in the 4th Avenue penthouse, correct? I do. It's a convenient location for my work. And you support your household? Your wife? Grady puffed out his chest. I do, Your Honor. My wife, Ginaa, is here today. She doesn't work. I provide everything for her. I take my responsibilities as a provider very seriously, just as I take my responsibilities to this city seriously. He gestured to Ginaa. I have built a life based on integrity and care. Vance looked at Grady. Then, for the first time, he shifted his gaze to the gallery. He looked directly at Ginaa. There was no recognition in his eyes, only a cold, judicial scrutiny. But Ginaa saw the micro-movement of his jaw. He was angry. Integrity, Vance repeated. That is a powerful word, Mr. Thorne. Do you know the penalty for perjury in a federal court? I do, Grady said, but I am telling the truth. You are telling a version of the truth, Vance said. He picked up a piece of paper. This morning my chambers received an anonymous submission of digital evidence, encrypted emails sent from your personal account. Grady froze. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Sterling shot up from his chair. Objection! Surprise evidence! We haven't seen this! Sit down, Mr. Sterling, Vance roared. The sound was like a thunderclap. This goes to the credibility of the witness. Vance looked back at Grady. Mr. Thorne, did you or did you not send an email on November 12th stating, and I quote, just get it done. I don't care about the soil stability. I care about the permit. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Grady's mouth opened and closed. He looked at Sterling. He looked at the prosecutor. And then, in a moment of panic, he looked at Ginaa. He expected to see her looking terrified. He expected to see her weeping for him. Instead, Ginaa was sitting perfectly still. Her legs were crossed. And on her face was a small, cold smile. She raised her hand slowly, bringing 2 fingers to her temple in a mock salute, a gesture she used to do with her father when they beat him at chess. Grady stared at her. His brain misfired. Why is she smiling? Why isn't she panicked? Mr. Thorne, Vance pressed. I am waiting for an answer. I don't recall that email. Grady stammered, sweat breaking out on his upper lip. It could be a fabrication. Anyone could hack an email. Interesting, Vance said. Because the metadata shows it was sent from a device with the IP address located at your residence, and forwarded from that same residence late last night. Grady's head snapped toward Ginaa again. Last night. She was the only one there. She was the only one who knew his passcode. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The waitress. The nobody. The charity case. Ginaa? He whispered, his voice caught by the microphone. Judge Vance leaned forward, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. You seem distracted, Mr. Thorne. Perhaps you are wondering who provided the court with this evidence, or perhaps you are realizing that the worthless wife you mentioned in your deposition might not be as helpless as you thought. Grady looked from Ginaa to the judge. He looked at the features, the same piercing eyes, the same set of the jaw, the way they both held themselves with absolute, unshakable confidence. Oh my God, Grady breathed. Mr. Thorne, Judge Vance said, and this time there was a dark satisfaction in his voice. I believe you have met my daughter. The silence in courtroom 4B didn't just break, it shattered. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The court reporter stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keys, mouth agape. Gregory Sterling, the greasy lawyer who had been so confident moments ago, physically recoiled from Grady, as if his client had suddenly burst into flames. Grady Thorne sat in the witness box, gripping the railing so hard his knuckles turned blue. He looked at the judge, the terrifying, granite-faced man who held his fate in his hands, and then he looked at Ginaa. She wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She was looking right at him, her eyes clear and unblinking. It wasn't a look of hatred. It was worse. It was a look of absolute pity. Your daughter? Grady croaked. His voice sounded small, stripped of all its usual bravado. That's impossible. She's a waitress. She's nobody. She is Dr. Ginaa Vance, the judge corrected, his voice booming like a gavel strike. She holds a Ph.D. in sociology from Stanford. She chose to work in a diner to study the socioeconomic dynamics of service workers. That is where you found her. And that is where you made the mistake of thinking her humility was weakness. Grady felt the room spinning. Every insult he had hurled at her, every time he had called her worthless, every plate he had smashed, it all came rushing back, not as memories of power, but as evidence of his own stupidity. He had been abusing the daughter of the most powerful man in the federal circuit. "Your Honor!" Sterling jumped up, desperate to salvage his own career. "My client was unaware. This is entrapment. This is a conflict of interest." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Vance barked. "There is no entrapment. Your client voluntarily perjured himself regarding the email evidence. And as for the conflict of interest..." Judge Vance slowly closed the file in front of him. He took off his glasses and placed them on the bench. "You are correct. I cannot sentence a man who has abused my own flesh and blood. It would be improper." Vance pressed a button on his console. "I am officially recusing myself from the sentencing phase of this trial. However, the evidence of perjury and fraud admitted to the record stands. I am transferring this case to Judge Holloway in courtroom 6. But before I go..." Vance looked at the bailiff. "Officer Miller, please take the witness into custody. He is a flight risk, and he has just committed a federal felony in my presence." "With pleasure, Your Honor," Officer Miller said, stepping forward with handcuffs. No, wait." Grady scrambled back in the chair, knocking over the microphone. Ginaa! Tell them I'm a good man. We're married. You can't let them do this." He reached out toward her, his face a mask of desperate terror. Ginaa stood up slowly. She smoothed the skirt of her blue dress. She walked toward the railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. She stopped just inches from where Grady was being restrained by the bailiff. "Grady," she said softly. "Baby, please." Grady wept, the tears mixing with the sweat on his face. "I love you. I'm sorry about the yelling. I'm sorry about everything. Just fix this. Call your dad off." Ginaa tilted her head. "You said I was worthless, Grady. You said I was decorative. You said I had no drive." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it and placed it on the defense table. "I'm not worthless," she whispered. "I'm the prosecution's star witness." Grady looked at the paper. It wasn't a legal motion. It was a printout of the divorce petition. "Get him out of my sight," Judge Vance ordered. Officer Miller hauled Grady up. As he was dragged out of the courtroom, kicking and screaming about his reputation, the entire gallery watched in stunned silence. The king of the city was being dragged out like a common criminal. Ginaa turned to the bench. Her father was still sitting there, looking down at her. For a moment, the judicial mask slipped, and he offered her a small, proud smile. He nodded once. Ginaa nodded back. She picked up her purse and walked out of the courtroom, her head held high, the sound of her heels echoing like victory. 6 months later, the visitation room at the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan was a place where hope went to suffocate. It was a sterile, soulless box, painted in a shade of institutional beige that seemed designed to drain the color from human skin. The air was perpetually cold, smelling of industrial bleach, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of fear. For Grady Thorne, this was his new kingdom. He sat on a bolted-down metal stool on the inmate side of the plexiglass barrier. 6 months of incarceration had eroded the man who once strutted through the penthouses of Seattle like a god. The bespoke Italian suits, once his armor, had been replaced by a coarse, ill-fitting khaki jumpsuit with his inmate number stenciled above the pocket. His hair, once styled with $50 gel, was thinning and graying at the temples, cut short in a mandatory buzz. His skin had taken on a sallow, waxen quality from the lack of sunlight, and the stress of survival in a place where his architectural degrees meant nothing. He checked the clock on the wall. 2 p.m. She was late. He drummed his fingers on the stainless steel counter. His narcissism, bruised but not broken, was working overtime to construct a narrative where he was still in control. She's late because she's nervous, he told himself. She's realizing she made a mistake. She's coming to beg for forgiveness. She needs me. He convinced himself that Ginaa was floundering without him. How could she not be? She was a waitress, a dropout, a woman he had plucked from obscurity. The courtroom drama 6 months ago was just a blip, a misunderstanding orchestrated by her vindictive father. Once Grady could speak to her, really speak to her, without lawyers and judges interfering, he could fix this. He could charm her back. He always did. The heavy steel door on the visitor's side buzzed and clicked open. Grady straightened his spine, putting on the mask of the misunderstood genius. He prepared a sympathetic smile, but when Ginaa walked in, the smile died on his lips. The woman who entered the room was not the timid, shuffling housewife who used to flinch when he dropped a spoon. She was radiant. She wore a tailored cream power suit that accentuated her posture, a posture that was upright, confident, and commanding. Her hair was loose, falling in soft waves around a face that looked 5 years younger than the last time he saw her. She wasn't wearing the heavy makeup she used to wear to hide the stress lines. Her skin was glowing. She carried a sleek leather briefcase, not a purse. She didn't look around nervously. She walked directly to the booth assigned to him, pulled out the chair, and sat down. She looked at him through the glass. Her eyes were clear, devoid of the fear he used to feed on. Grady picked up the phone receiver. His hand was trembling slightly, a betrayal of his nerves. Ginaa picked up hers. "You look different," Grady said, his voice raspy from disuse. He tried to inject a note of warmth, a reminder of their intimacy. "Hello, Grady," Ginaa said. Her voice was calm, measured. It was the voice of a stranger. "I knew you'd come," Grady said, leaning in as close as the glass would allow. "I've been writing to you." "Did you get my letters?" The warden said they were sent. "I told you about the appeal. Sterling messed up, Ginaa. He didn't defend me properly. Once we get a new trial, I'll be out of here, and we can put this nightmare behind us." Ginaa stared at him, blinking slowly. "I received the letters, Grady. I didn't read them." "My lawyer advised against it." "Lawyer?" Grady scoffed, a flash of his old arrogance surfacing. "You mean your daddy?" "Ginaa, come on, look at me. This is me, your husband. I know things got heated. I know I was. Intense. But I was under so much pressure. You know how important the Kensington Project was? I did it for us. For our future." He waited for her to nod, to agree, to fall into the old rhythm of soothing his ego. She didn't. "There is no us, Grady," she said. "And there is no Kensington Project. The city canceled the contract the day after your sentencing. The firm, Thorne Architecture, is bankrupt. They liquidated everything to pay the fines." Grady felt a cold pit open in his stomach. "Liquidated? What about the penthouse, my car?" "The penthouse was leased in the company name," Ginaa explained patiently, as if explaining gravity to a child. "The Porsche was a company vehicle. When the company folded, the assets were seized. You have nothing, Grady. The accounts were frozen and drained by the lawsuits. But my personal savings, commingled with company funds," Ginaa cut in. "The forensic accountants found everything. The bribes, the payoffs, the consulting fees. It's all gone." Grady sat back, stunned. His empire was dust. But then his eyes narrowed. He looked at her suit, the expensive watch on her wrist. "If it's all gone, then how are you living?" he sneered. "Daddy paying for everything again. I was right. You're just a leech. You moved from my wallet back to his." Ginaa smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile, but it was devastatingly pitying. "I'm not living on my father's money, Grady. I'm living on my own." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick, hardcover book. She held it up to the glass. The cover was stark white with a fracture line running down the center. The title was bold, "The Glass House, The Psychology of Coercive Control in High-Status Marriages." Underneath the title, the author's name was printed in gold, Dr. Ginaa Vance. "What is this?" Grady asked, confused. "My thesis," Ginaa said. "I finished it. It was published last month. It's currently number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list." Grady stared at the book. You wrote a book about me." "I wrote a book about Subject Zero," Ginaa corrected. "I changed the names, of course. Legal reasons. But the story is there. The gaslighting, the financial control, the isolation, the way you made me feel small so you could feel big. The world found it very compelling." You bitch," Grady whispered, the receiver shaking in his hand. "You used me." "I studied you," she said. "There's a difference. You treated me like an object, Grady. You thought I was a blank slate you could write your life on. You never bothered to ask who I was before you met me. You never asked about my degree, my interests, or my family. You were so in love with the sound of your own voice that you never heard mine." She put the book down and pulled out a thin file. "This is the reason I'm here today. It's not to gloat. It's to close the door." She pressed the file against the glass. "The divorce decree. It was finalized this morning by Judge Holloway. You didn't contest it because you couldn't afford a lawyer, and your court-appointed counsel agreed there were no assets to split." Grady looked at the stamp on the paper. Dissolved. "Ginaa, please." Grady's voice cracked, desperation finally breaking through the anger. "Don't do this. I have 8 years in here. 8 years! I can't do this alone. I'll die in here without hope. Just tell me there's a chance. Tell me that if I change, if I take anger management classes, tell me you'll be there when I get out." He looked at her with wet, pleading eyes. It was a performance that had worked a dozen times before. It was the sorrowful boy routine that usually made her fold. Ginaa looked at the man she had once vowed to love and cherish. She searched her heart for any lingering spark of affection, any remnant of the love she thought she had. She found nothing, just a vast, peaceful silence. "You won't die, Grady," she said softly. "You're a survivor. You'll find someone else to blame. You'll find a new narrative where you're the victim and I'm the villain. You'll survive because you're too in love with yourself to let go." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "But you will do it alone." "No." Grady slammed his hand against the glass, making the guard in the corner look up sharply. "You can't leave me here. I made you. You were a waitress. You were nothing." Ginaa leaned in one last time, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried through the wire. "I was never nothing, Grady. I was just waiting for the right moment to be everything." She hung up the receiver. "Ginaa!" Grady screamed, his voice muffled by the thick glass. He banged his fists against the barrier. "Ginaa, come back!" She didn't look back, not once. She turned and walked toward the heavy steel door. The buzzer sounded, a harsh, grinding noise. But to Ginaa, it sounded like music. It was the sound of a chain breaking. She stepped out of the visitation room and into the corridor. The heavy door clanged shut behind her, sealing the tomb of her past marriage. She walked through the security checkpoints, her heels clicking rhythmically on the linoleum. Click-clack, click-clack. It was the cadence of freedom. She pushed through the final exit doors and stepped out into the crisp, gray afternoon. The wind caught her hair, blowing it back from her face. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with air that didn't smell of bleach or fear. It smelled of rain and pine and possibility. A sleek black town car was idling at the curb. The rear window rolled down. Judge Arthur Vance sat there, his reading glasses perched on his nose, a newspaper in his lap. He looked up, his stern face softening into a look of profound pride. "Is it done?" he asked simply. Ginaa opened the car door and slid onto the leather seat. "It's done, Dad." "How did he take it?" "About as well as he took the verdict," Ginaa said, buckling her seatbelt. "He thinks I'm the villain." Let him think what he wants, Vance grunted, folding his newspaper. He has 8 years to think about it. Now, more importantly, I made reservations at that Italian place you like, the one with the terrible service, but the excellent wine. Ginaa laughed. It was a full, deep laugh that shook her shoulders. I think I'm in the mood for excellent wine. Driver, the judge said, tapping the partition, let's go home. As the car pulled away from the prison, Ginaa looked out the window one last time. The razor wire fences and guard towers shrank into the distance, becoming small and insignificant against the vastness of the skyline. She caught her reflection in the darkened glass. She didn't see a victim. She didn't see a survivor. She saw Dr. Ginaa Vance, a woman who had walked through fire and come out made of steel. She turned away from the window and looked ahead, toward the city, toward her work, and toward a future that was finally, entirely her own. Grady Thorne spent his life building skyscrapers, obsessed with height and grandeur, but he never realized that the most dangerous thing he ever built was the lie he lived with his wife. He believed power came from shouting, from money, and from making others feel small. He learned too late that real power is quiet. It waits. And when the time is right, it strikes with the absolute finality of a gavel. Ginaa didn't just leave a bad marriage. She dismantled it with the precision of a master architect. Her story is a powerful reminder to all of us. Never mistake silence for weakness, and be careful who you step on today, because they might be the one holding the keys to your freedom tomorrow. What would you have done if you were Ginaa? Would you have revealed your identity sooner, or was her long game the perfect revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.